subscribe.
Me and my twin brother Ronnie teamed up to become two of England's most notorious gangsters. As a youngster, I showed promise as a boxer growing up, but I chose a life of crime instead. Me and Ron eventually built up our own gang. We were known as the Firm. We were engaged in an array of illegal enterprises, from extortion to murder. In 1968, I was arrested on murder charges. My life in crime ended the following year when I was convicted. I spent nearly the rest of my days as a prisoner. I was born on October 24th, 1933 in East London. We eventually ruled London's East End in the 1950s and 1960s. The Kray brothers are still remembered as being two of England's most infamous crime bosses. We were very close to our mother Violet. After refusing to serve in the military, our dad, who was a second-hand clothes dealer, drifted in and out of our lives. I showed a talent for using my fists early on and won several boxing tournaments, including the 1948 Hackney Schoolboy Boxing Championship. In 1951, I had to trade in my boxing gloves for a uniform to perform national service, but Ron and me weren't interested in the military life at all, and rebelled in our own ways. We were both dishonorably discharged in 1954. We built up our own gang and became a dominant force in the East End. Each of us had his own strengths. I reckon I had a bit more charm than Ronnie. I was known for having charm and brains, while Ronnie was known for his might and short temper. Both of us loved to dress to the nines, and our high-end suits became part of our signature look. We ran several clubs and rubbed elbows with many celebrities, including singer Frank Sinatra and actor George Raft. I created my famous punch. I called it my cigarette punch. I would act like I was going to place a cigarette in my intended target's mouth and then hit him while his mouth was open, breaking the jaw. Both me and Ron spent time behind bars for various offences, but it didn't make a dent in our criminal activities. Our downfall began in 1967 when I killed Jack the Hat McVitie. We had hired McVitie to bump off Leslie Payne, our business manager, but he failed to pull the hit off. Our relationship with McVitie soured after that, and McVitie even made the mistake of threatening to kill me and Ron. After urging by Ronnie, I decided to get rid of McVitie. When the gun failed, I ended up stabbing McVitie to death. The following year, our entire firm were arrested for a long list of offences. We were convicted the following year and spent most of the remainder of our lives separated from each other. During my time in prison, I've written several books, including the 1988 dual memoir, Our Story with Ronnie, and another autobiography, Born Fighter. I went on to discover religion in jail and became a born-again Christian. Sometimes when I look back at my life as I sit in my cell, I lie back in my bed with the radio on, hardly listening. My thoughts are miles away in the past. The faces of yesterday come alive to my eyes, and I wonder where some of my old friends have gone and what they're doing now. I think of how much I would like to have a chat with them, but alas, it is not to be. Time and distance can be so sad. On Sundays, the hymns on Radio 2 remind me of Wormwood Scrubs. When Ron and I were 16 years of age, in the prison church with all the young offenders, I can still see all their faces. Time has taken many of our old friends from us through death, and we are left with just the memories and the dreams. Recently I dreamed I was 23 again. I was in the Regent Canal dock area of London with my late friend Billy Jones. I woke up, and as I lay in the darkness with my thoughts, I could see the faces before me. Billy Jones, Jim Harris, Reginald, all friends who are no longer with us. They will not be at the gate to meet me when I get out, but I know they will be there in spirit. My main regret in life is that I wasn't in the company of my parents. I suppose, like us all, I now realise I took them too much for granted and thought they would be with us forever. Not long ago I dreamed I was once again in the company of my mother and my Uncle Jack. I suddenly woke to the familiar surroundings of my cell. I went there alone and I soon found, to my great disappointment and sorrow, all these years in prison, and I still get flashbacks to the past, to other times and other places which I've enjoyed. It must be some sort of safety valve that works in my sleep to induce good feelings. The memories I most cherish of my late parents are from the days when we all lived together at 178 Valence Road in Bethnal Green. Number 178 was a lucky old house. It had a big oak door with a large knocker, and the people used to call it Fort Valence, a name which was given to it by a fella called the Curly King, and it was a terraced house with a toilet out in the yard. Ron and I used to love the kitchen. We had a big coal fire and we used to sit around it while our mother used to be doing the ironing or making pots of stew or cups of tea. When we were kids, Ron and I used to sleep in the back room, and sometimes we would lie there in the mornings listening to my mother Violet singing Vera Lynn songs. She had a melodious singing voice with good resonance, and as I listened I used to get great comfort and a feeling of belonging, as though we were in our own mansion and not just a terraced house. My old man, as we referred to my father Charles, was a man of few words, but he had a good personality, and when I would walk into the small kitchen he would proudly say to me, "Your mother has a good voice, hasn't she? She should have been a singer," and I would nod in agreement while he poured me a cup of tea. He used to keep chickens in the backyard, which we would eventually eat. I remember once a little chick, just a few days old, fell into a bowl of water and appeared to be dead. My old man placed it on a cloth in the oven with the gas on warm, and the bird recovered. Afterwards it used to follow my father all over the kitchen. The old man always used to have parties in the house, and my mother was always a good hostess. Never once did my parents turn away anyone who had nowhere to sleep or was in need of a meal. All our friends would be welcome, even if they were wanted by the law. I suppose that's why I've always liked plenty of company, and this has helped me in prison because I'm used to waking up with people around me. Despite what has been written about us in the past, it's not true that Ron ever struck the old man, although there used to be many arguments, just like most families in the East End had in those days. My old man was on the run from the army for 12 years, so he had some excuse to turn to drink, seeing that his family life had been so disrupted, but I never forgot that he went on the run in the first place to look after us when we were young. I have always been proud of him. It was he who first took Ron and me to the Robert Browning Youth Club in South London for boxing lessons. He would take us on a number 8 bus from Bethnal Green to Camberwell 3 times a week to train at the club. He was always immaculate in dress and would go to the barber's every day for a shave. He would also have a bet each day, and his regular haunt for drinking would be the 99 Public House in Liverpool Street. My Aunt Rosa and Aunt May were my mother's sisters, and my mother's brother John Lee lived in the cafe he owned on the opposite side of the road. His wife, my Aunt Maud, used to run the cafe, and she sold delicious meals and the most wonderful fairy cakes which she made herself, and transport workers would fill the cafe every day of the week. John also drove a huge coach as part of his occupation. The old house in Valence Road had weapons hidden everywhere. Most of them were kept under the floorboards, but Ron wanted quick access to one particular small gun he liked and had the brainwave to hide it inside a loaf of bread, which we always stored in a wooden safe with a knife. He dug a hole through the middle of the loaf and then placed the little silver revolver into the bread and pressed the bread he had taken out of the middle over the gun. He then placed the loaf back into the wooden safe. As Ron said, it was an ideal place to always keep a shooter handy in case we ever needed one quickly. What you must take into account is that in gang warfare in London through the years, gangs had at times attacked their rivals in their own homes, sometimes even when they were in bed. and Ron and I were determined this would not happen to us. We had no intention of being caught unawares. The East End in our day was a tough area. The governor of the manor then was Tommy Smithson. He could really have a fight. He was about 30 years of age and was well known and respected throughout London. He came from Hackney and was 5 feet 10 with an athletic build. He was good looking in a rugged way with a slightly broken nose, high cheekbones, good teeth and brown eyes. He had spent many years in the Merchant Navy and had fought in the ring as well as on the street. He was murdered in 1956 after being shot in the neck and left to die in a gutter in Kilburn. Me and Ron attended his funeral. The man I wanted to emulate most of all was Billy Hill. He was very physical and could be violent if necessary. He wasn't powerfully built, but he could be vicious with a knife. At the same time, he had a good brain, and this appealed to me. I learned a lot by observing the way he put his thoughts into action. One day, Ron and I, our brother Charlie, and our friend Willie Malone were at Valence Road when the phone rang. Ron picked up the receiver, and it was Billy Hill on the line. He said, "Will you come over to my flat as quickly as possible?" Ron said, "Oh no, okay Billy," and told us, "I think he's got some kind of trouble, let's get over there." Ron and I picked up a shooter each and the four of us left, with Charlie driving his car to Bill's flat in Bayswater. We arrived very quickly. Ron said to Bill, "What's the trouble? We've brought some shooters." Bill laughed. He left us in the lounge, went into his bedroom, and when he came back, he tossed £500 in brand new notes onto the table. He said, "Take this few quid for your trouble and cut it up between you. I was only testing. I wanted to find out if you would get here fast or if you would blank the emergency." One pub Ron never did like was the Blind Beggar in Whitechapel Road, the pub where he would later shoot dead George Cornell. It's been renovated since then, of course, but in the old days, Ron hated the sight of the beggars and called it a dump. He says today that he must have had a premonition about it. Ron used to like drinking gin and tonic, but if he was drinking beer, it would be brown ale, and he claims a record of 53 pints of brown ale in one night. He used to pour it down. Ron, Charlie and I could drink all night and never get drunk. Even the hard-drinking American mafia men who came to see us in later years were amazed at our capacity for putting so much drink away. And I miss those social gatherings. So on a typical night, Ron and I would walk into a public house in the early evening, just the two of us, and take out our phone books. We'd phone our friends in different parts of London, and within an hour they would all start to arrive in cars or taxis to join us in drinks and social and business talks. There were people from all walks of life, some villains, some bookmakers, publicans, professional and ex-professional fighters and their managers and businessmen, intermingled with a few celebrities. We used to have some wonderful nights out, and one time we were joined by two little midgets who were friends of Ron's. John Pearson, the author who wrote a book about us titled The Profession of Violence, was in the pub researching for the book. Ron spoke to the two midgets quietly. He said to them, "See that fella over there? He's writing a book on me and Reg, but I want to make sure he doesn't mug us off. So before the night's out, have a word with him and tell him to be careful." I watched all this from a distance, and it was quite amusing. The two midgets walked to the bar where Pearson was standing, and they tugged at his trousers. I could see he was already reeling from the number of drinks he'd had. He looked down in startled amazement, and the two midgets stared back at him as though looking up at a skyscraper. Before Pearson could recover from his shock, one of the midgets snarled at him, while the other one gave another tug at his trouser leg and said, "If you mug the twins off, you'll have us to deal with." Pearson could only look more amazed and gulped his G&T down as though in disbelief. He was white when he left the pub a little later. It was this type of humour which made my nights. Ron and I were in our element, being nocturnal anyway, and for a long while I found it difficult to get used to being locked up at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. in the evenings when I was first sentenced. Even today, all these years on, I still get out of bed in the early hours to listen to my radio while having a cup of tea. Occasionally I see the past as though it's on film in front of me, and it's always these highlights of humour and good times which stand out more than the bad experiences. It must be that nature made us this way, to remember happiness more than sorrow in the seesaw of life. It wasn't all a party though. As I said, a lot of our drinking was for business purposes, and during our reign, up until we got our life sentences, Ron and I had the control of 33 clubs throughout London, plus many long-term fraud firms, one public house and various other interests. And it was Ron and I who were the instigators of all these businesses. We brought money in legally and otherwise through drinking and gambling clubs, crooked bonds, deals, frauds, selling stolen goods, getting fees for looking after businesses and selling phony jewellery. A lot of money was involved, but I haven't a clue how much. Apart from the clubs which we ran, we didn't keep books. My cell is large with big windows. It's painted in pale blue and white. I have a pale green bedspread, dark blue curtains and photos in gold and white frames all round the walls and on the table. There are photos of my late mother and father and my late wife, Frances. Taking pride of place is my favourite photo, Frances and me in the room at the top in Ilford. She looks beautiful as she was. There are other photographs too of Pete Gillett, his son Liam, my young pal Brad Lane, and other friends such as Barbara Windsor, Barbara Streisand, Diana Dawes, Flanagan and Jules Holland. I feel Lewis is good for me. I seem to have got my head together, although I can still have the odd bad day, just like anyone. Sometimes I think to myself that as much as Lewis has a relaxed atmosphere and is in many ways a good jail, it is still a jail, and there's no place like the street. Just like a caged lion or tiger, I still yearn for freedom, though in a peculiar way. I might wake in the early hours and realise that all the street traders who are my kind of people would be getting ready to put the stalls out at Brick Lane and Petticoat Lane, just as I used to as a kid. I have to remind myself at times like this that locks, bars and keys do not make a prison as long as the mind is free to wander. At this stage in my sentence, there is no room for bitterness in my heart, because in the past few years, I've had so much joy in discovering new friends and developing my own interests. It's been said by some that Ron and I sit in despair and have been unhappy ever since we were sentenced. I'd like to put the record straight. All these years later, I feel fitter mentally and physically. I've kept myself in shape in every possible way, from my sessions in the gym to my morning routine of holding a towel and twisting it in alternate directions from one end to the other to strengthen my grip. I believe that Ron and I have been blessed in many ways, particularly by good friends and fortune. This is all part of the philosophy which has helped me for the last 2 decades. One of the things that people out there do wrong on the street is take life for granted too much. Being in prison gives you a new insight. If I were back on the street now, I would never take life for granted again. It's like the difference between swallowing food and chewing food. We all swallow life too fast and do not chew its pleasures. As the saying goes, what is life if we do not stop and stare? Each day I say a prayer. It is not a prayer said in despair or sorrow. It is a prayer of thanks. I'm thankful for my friends and family, for being given the chance to live again through my writings, despite the walls which have surrounded me, for being fortunate in my health when others are so tragically disabled, and for being given the ability to cope with my sentence. I decided long ago that the best way to beat my sentence was to go along with the tide rather than swim against it and drown. to enjoy each day rather than wishing the time away. I cram as much into each day as possible because the more one puts in, the more one will get out of that day. If one watches a kettle boiling, it seems to take longer. My philosophy takes the watching of the kettle into consideration. Now I find the days are going by far too quickly because I no longer wish my life away as I did during the first few years of my sentence. Sometimes I get out of bed in the early hours to practice yoga before starting work on my letter writing. I suppose at times I am happier than others who may be sunbathing on Miami Beach or jetting round the world from one luxurious hotel to another. You may as well build castles in the sky as build dungeons below in your thinking. It is just as easy to be optimistic in life as pessimistic. To an extent, it's true that we are a product of what we think we are. Worry has never solved any problems. Bitterness destroys the one who is bitter, and the pessimist will always lack enthusiasm. After all these years, we are now like museum pieces, relics of the past, especially since we are not around the streets to be seen. People still visualize us as we were, physically and mentally. This too creates an enigma type of picture. Is it not right that the more exclusive the club is, the more they want to become members or to see the show? That applies to Ron and me because we are shut away. When thinking of the past and the fact that thankfully the good memories override the bad, I recall an old Chinese tale. One day a passerby came across an old dilapidated castle. Its thick walls were crumbling and broken, and nearby was a pond which was very still. The passerby stopped at the edge of the pond and gazed into the stillness of the water which mirrored the old castle. I guess when I sit in my cell and reflect on the past, my thoughts are like that of the passerby. I tend to remember mostly the great days and also see some of the ruins and the stillness that are with us today. But we should strive towards the future regardless of the past. Yesterday is but today's memory, and tomorrow is today's dream. 1,000 years have passed by since yesterday.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.